a minute or two, but it takes just about 5 more seconds till this full blue bar goes.
Beautiful.
And boom, just like that, we are now officially live. It is Wednesday, October 8th. It's just the way this month has worked out. We have our two live shows every month, Tech Talk Tuesday, the first and third Tuesday of every month, and Wildfire Wednesday, the second and fourth Wednesday of every month. In October, the first Tuesday and the second Wednesday happen to be back to back. So it's a busy week, but welcome everyone. Excited to be here today, talking all things mid-season perspectives from the 2025 Fire Frontlines with my co-host, brother from another mother, Eric Litzenberg. I'm going to pass over to him, and then excited to have you all here, Mike, Aaron, and Jason. So, Eric, pass it to you. I'll be the sous chef moderator here, and excited to dive in on what's been going on and what we can teach and learn from the IFC fire community. So, Eric?
Appreciate it, Kevin. Thanks for the intro. For once, we're wearing different colored shirts, which is semi-exciting.
I know it's kind of weird. I feel
Yeah.
uncomfortable actually.
And for once, I did not forget to go on mute, but I will at some point during this call. So we're just getting the embarrassment out of the way right up front. When somebody says you're off mute, I expect it. So here we go. Excited to have this panel with Jason, Mike, and Aaron on to talk about mid-season perspectives, maybe later season perspectives, but also everything related. It's not just going to be about, what they've seen this year. All three of these guys bring a perspective that's worth talking about. And I do want to say, Kevin, before we kick into intros to these guys, I watched your Tech Tuesday yesterday, which, unless my dates were wrong, was about TAC, and it could have just as easily been Wildfire Wednesdays, because that's a pretty big thing in our business. So a lot of crossover between what you're
We should,
doing on one show and another.
correct. I mean, maybe we talk about TAC today and common operating platforms because that's definitely fresh of mind right now.
Yeah, I'm sure you could be a panelist with us on that. But we don't have a TAC expert as far as I know, so we'll go on with what we have. And what we'll do is introduce these three guys, have them introduce themselves. Like I said, each brings a pretty cool perspective from three different states, three different positions and roles that they serve, both in their departments locally for those who are still in it, or for those who have already retired. They've served different roles in the past. And then on incident management teams, and in some cases off incident management teams, they all have different perspectives that are going to be interesting. So, Jason, why don't we start with you? Why don't you give us a quick intro to who you are and where you came from?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. So I am the assistant chief for the Sedona Fire District, and I'm also an operations chief on Southwest Area Team One. Been on the team for 20 years, about 300 incidents, about 3 years deployed. Right now, I focus mostly on the strategy, developing the strategy. So that's what I do.
So, Jason, let's pick into that before we get to the others for a second. Because if you look you up on LinkedIn or Facebook or Google or whatever, you see a lot about strategy and red grouping, red teaming, whatever you call it. Why don't you tell us a tiny bit about that interest and why you do it?
Yeah. So I thought I thought it would be important to learn more about strategy as I began to develop the strategy for these incidents. And basically, I had to unknow a lot of what I thought I knew. And so, going back to the military roots of it, doing the red teaming, I realized that it wasn't about me developing a strategy in a box that was going to be the best strategy that I present to the world, but it was about developing the tools to help people get over their assumptions and biases and contribute to that strategy and make it where that strategy was could be manipulated and adapted as the environment changed. So it was really a 180 degrees from presenting this perfect strategy to frameworks that help people to be able to adapt in real time to the problems that they face. It's been a lot of fun. It has been a lot of fun.
Because it's semi-related and we talked about it, what's the map over your shoulder?
Yeah. So the map over my shoulder is an escape map. It's actually a silk cravat or handkerchief that was issued to I was in an airborne unit, and it was issued to airborne soldiers in World War II before D-Day. And so that way, when they landed and they were not where they were supposed to be, they had a map. And I think about a lot when it comes to strategy, right? We can have a plan going forward, but we should make sure that everybody has a map and on how to communicate, whether it's through mission command or whatever other framework you want to use, so that you know when you land someplace that you're not, what you're going to do to deviate, how you're going to communicate that deviation, and how that's still going to align with the mission.
Interesting that we were just talking about tack
Yeah.
as, and now we're talking about a silk, handkerchief that somebody, that's pretty wild. Thanks, Jason. Glad to have you on board, man.
Thank you.
Mike, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you come from, what you do?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Mike Connolly. I was with the municipal department here in Northern Colorado for about 15 years or so. Retired from that to start working with the Forest Service International programs as a technical advisor. Really spreading the word on incident command systems, ICS, and working with their emergency operations centers. So over the past 3 years, I've been able to travel to a number of countries and work with senior leadership in their civil defense sometimes, sometimes their fire services, park services, whatever framework they have, working with that leadership and instituting those concepts. A lot of folks either are coming from a separate type of framework, whether it's I worked in Mongolia for a bit, so they have more of a Soviet style approach to civil defense and civil, I guess, fire attack, whatnot. Switching that over to the ICS and NIMS kind of framework that we have, and then other countries that who requested for assistance to embolden and strengthen their systems, basically. Doing that, and also responding to fires whenever I can to keep my feet wet, keep up with the technology that's out there and the response mechanisms we have, and just keep in the mix.
Couple questions for you, Mike,
All
which
right.
got triggered with that. So Mongolia uses more of a Soviet style of command or response. What would be just a couple like principles of Soviet versus what we use in the US with NIMS?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on that, of course, but it seems to be more of a siloed, more top-down approach. And you'll see that in a lot of places in Eastern Europe, things that were previous government systems like that. It's pretty common. And it works for the most part. The difference with ours is we push that decision making down to really the lowest level unit, to basically the squad level almost. You have a lot of autonomy and decision making space at those lower levels. It doesn't have to come all the way up to the top to get approval and then come all the way back down to take action. So
Nice.
it's a little more flexible, I think. There's a little more autonomy and command in that. Ours is based on more complexity, where in a lot of places it'll be based on kind of a doctrinal thing. Like if you need this many people, then it automatically goes to this boss. It's not like you can continue your command presence up until a certain level of complexity. Does that make sense? In our system, if you're comfortable up to a certain level, you can keep that command. In some of those systems, other systems, it automatically gets turned over no matter what because it hits a certain threshold.
It must be an interesting perspective for you to get, and it must be useful for them to have you with your different NIMS perspective as well.
Maybe it is interesting though. It's super interesting to see the differences and the likenesses. In the end, the work gets done. It's just how it gets done and what type of what type of communication processes they have, what kind of information sharing they do, and things like that. So everybody has their challenges. We certainly have our own. They have theirs and other systems, and so it's really just trying to find what works and makes it more efficient for whoever's requesting for assistance. So they take parts of our system, incorporate it into theirs. Sometimes we take other people's systems and incorporate it into ours. It's whatever works out best for us.
And as far as your response on US incident management teams, are you with a specific team, or are you a free agent, as it were?
I'm a free agent mostly. Yeah. I'm working mostly with the Rocky Mountain teams as a liaison officer trainee. I've been hesitant to kind of dive into the team world because it's fairly structured, and I like to get out as much as possible sometimes. And the stars haven't really aligned too much this season to get out on those teams. I had other work, which kind of I wasn't able to dive in, but so yeah. Otherwise, I'll go out just freelance, either a division, task force, or if I can get the liaison, yeah, I'll do that.
What does a liaison officer do?
Oh boy. Okay.
I mean,
You know,
it's a loafer. The acronym is loafer.
I
So
know it's
everybody's
perfect.
asking, what does a loafer do?
Well, yeah, knowing the vernacular term for loafer, I thought, hey, I'm built for that, you know. But actually, you have to do some work. You know, you actually have to engage people, and you know, it's basically working with incident command and PIOs a lot of to kind of reach out to the community, to reach out to either community level folks or county level or other government officials and help bridge the gap between the incident team and that community. So it could be it feels like it bleeds into PIO stuff sometimes, you know, because you will be running some meetings here and there, questions and answers. But it's really providing that bridge between the incident, ICP, and the community, whether it's the state, county, or local level interest groups or stakeholders.
Make a good loafer too, I think so.
Yeah, I was a little bit duped. I wasn't expecting to have to, you know, I wanted to just kind of loaf around, you know, curious observer stuff, but it's definitely not that.
Well, glad you're in there doing it. Thanks for the intro. Aaron, tell us a little bit
Yes.
about you.
Currently the fire chief of Kittitas County Fire District 7, which is in Washington, on the eastern side of the Cascades. And before that, I worked as a deputy chief in Carson City, Nevada. And then I was a fire chief in Santa Cruz, California. And most of my career was spent in Chico, California, all the way up to interim fire chief. And then 20 years on an incident management team, operations, logistics, and command staff roles. And then also worked in the EOC as the deputy EOC manager for a few incidents in Butte County out of Chico, and then also in Santa Cruz County. And then mostly right now I'm in the middle of switching offices, so I'm in a conference room which everyone walks through. So it'll be a very busy walkthrough if people come through here. So I apologize for that. And then, you know, just being part of the ISC WUI policy committee and engaging with that, and then also on the NWCG incident management team core steering committee.
And that last thing's probably not familiar to people. Actually, a few of those might not be, and we can explore them. But the last one, I think, is the one that fewest people. What is the fewest people know about? What is the IMT Core Steering Committee? Why are you even doing that?
So the incident management team core steering committee was put together to develop curriculum. Well, the initial task was to develop a curriculum to introduce people to incident management teams. There is a gap between or succession. There's a gap in the succession plan of getting people involved in incident management teams. And the directive we got was to create a modular course delivery to introduce people to the incident management team. Now, those people that we're looking to recruit can be in any discipline. And for us in local government, if we had someone in Parks and Rec or the finance or dispatchers or whatever it is that they could do to support an incident management team, to give them the foundation of what an incident management team does, what are some of the roles and responsibilities, the different sections, and with the federal agencies looking at different disciplines that can help support incident management teams and start building some depth in and potential pool of people to fill the gaps that we're going to be having with our incident management teams. As the group knows, the number of incidents that we're responding to has increased, the intensity has increased, and the complexities have increased. And with the restructuring of the incident management teams, eliminating the type twos and having just complex and type threes, trying to fill that gap going from type three to type two. That course delivery, which will be a hybrid model of online learning and instructor-led learning, should be rolled out relatively soon. I think we're supposed to have it done for the NWCG exec board by Monday. We might have missed that date by a couple days, but Eric, you might know that better than I will. And then now we've been tasked with closing the gap between the introduction incident management team to complex incident management team. We were given direction and approval to the S420 to try to fill that gap. After we developed the course, we did realize that there was a huge jump from the introduction to complex and how to fill that gap. So we're restructuring the S420 course to make that happen with some advisors from 520 and other cadres from NWCG and All Hazard Incident Management Team and FEMA to try to fill that gap. I think that'll be a quicker turnaround because of we're not creating the curriculum. We're going to be just modifying it to make sure we connect both dots between intro and complex.
For those, there were a lot of acronyms and numbers, more numbers than acronyms in that one usually. But for those who don't follow this, I'm going to try to summarize, Aaron, and then you can just nod or you can say, boy, that's way off. We're trying to get more people in the system when it comes to incident management. And part of that is experience. I mean, we've seen this year, a lot of people say in 2025, we've gotten lucky. I sort of agree, right? We've got a strained system, but we didn't strain as much as we might have under a normal year. And we're going to start talking about 2025 here, but the system is strained. We're trying to get more people within it. And now you're helping create a essentially educational experiential ladder from entry into instant management teams, which is S320, then mid-level, which is S420, and then the upper level, which is S520. So there's 3 course ladder if you're trying to learn how to be on an IMT and be effective, right? Not
Yeah, that is correct. And I couldn't give 420 a title yet because we haven't gotten one yet.
yeah, good job. So going from that, Aaron, ironically, here we are talking about IMTs. And you have a history of IMTs. We're gonna go backwards here. And so Jason and Mike, I'm interested to get your perspective after this. But starting with you, Aaron, this season, you've taken on not only a new role with your job, but you weren't out on IMTs. You had a different role. Tell us about 2025 and how it's been for you.
So 2025, as the fire chief, I've been filling the role of the agency administrator. We've had a few incidents up here where resources were stretched thin, and we had to use what they call in Washington a state mobilization for incident management teams. So my role as the agency administrator was to approve a delegation of authority to have them assist us with the mitigation of the incidents we had. We went from initial attack to extended attack, so multiple days, not only with the suppression efforts, but also with the confinement and overhaul and mop up of those fires that threatened multiple homes in our community. And we are a small combination department that was quickly overwhelmed. And with the state resources and the Fed resources, I've been filling that role to make sure that the needs of the community represented by the fire chief were being met by those incident management teams and working with the liaison officers and communicating with the ops chiefs and the ICs to make sure our critical values at risk were being met.
And so, I think a lot of people who aren't involved, either in areas that they've handed over authority to an IMT or an incident management team, or those who aren't on incident management teams, might not. I mean, I would think an agency administrator is the person sitting there doing HR and finance and legal and that kind of thing. In this case, agency administrator is you're the one essentially making sure your community is linked with whichever incident management team is coming in and making sure that the groups within your community are linked as well. Is that correct?
That is correct. And I think that's something that I keep looking at this group, and I know most of you quite well, and I forget to speak clear text. I have an obligation to make sure that I protect our communities, and by delegating that authority, having good open communication and clear roles and responsibilities with that is very important to me, that my community is being protected, and that agency administrator is really that. I represent the agency, in this case, Kittitas County Fire District 7, and I'm administrating our needs to them through the delegation of authority. And that is communicated down in through the objectives, the incident objectives, which I have a voice in, and somewhat of a voice in working with operations to provide them my needs through the IC, incident commander.
And how many fires did you have this year that you had to be the AA for, agency
Th-
administrator?
3.
Jeez. That is unusual. For perspective, I'm from Santa Fe, New Mexico. We've got a pretty good history of fires. In my entire leadership time, I was essentially agency administrator once. You did it 3 times in a year. Why is that? Is Washington or the general geographic area just been walloped this year?
I think the we've had a few starts. 2 of them were human caused, one lightning, and those fuels that are around us have just the right time, right place, wrong environment. This is a very fast growing community, so there are being more homes being built, more people coming here, and then also more people coming through here. The I-90 corridor coming from the west side, the Seattle area, which is heavily populated, comes over the pass through the Cascades and enjoys the Okanagan-Wenatchee National Forest and some of the areas around here. And there's more human interaction, and the weather has also turned kind of for the worse, so to speak. We've had a few years of drought, and the conditions are starting to become more similar to what I was used to in my 26 years in California. So if you look at the fire history, California's obviously been burning for years. Oregon's the last 10 years, Oregon's had their worst fire season, and I think in my opinion, the threat is moving north and the potential for those more catastrophic fires. So my role is increasingly becoming more active as the agency administrator.
Gotcha. As the agency administrator. You're
Yes.
gonna have less freedom perhaps to go out on IMTs and you know more responsibilities sitting around at home.
Going to a
Right?
lot more meetings.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned liaison officer. As AA, you work a lot with liaison. Going back to Mike here, Mike, you're one of those folks, or you're training to be one. Tell us about your experience this year going out, whatever you've seen with fire.
Yeah, I didn't get out as a liaison this year. I just went out as division, and I actually was on a fire up in Aaron's area, which is a really beautiful area. I know exactly why people want to be there. One of the first things you do is you're rolling into, most people roll into fires. You're like, oh, looking at the Zillow, this is a pretty nice area, But yeah, what I noticed and was just a little bit, I don't know if it's scarcity of resources. Coming in as a division, one of the first things I saw I needed was a couple of task force leaders. And so putting those orders in early and never really received them. And I don't know if that's an IROC thing or if it's scarcity or time of year or what, it's one of the first thing that jumped out to me was I'm gonna have to wait a little while. I'm to adjust my objectives, maybe adjust my strategy and how I'm going to approach this certain area, in my division and what I'm going to do. Um, that was the main thing there was that I saw. That and the use of we've seen the use of forward operating bases, the FOBs. We've seen those for years now since COVID, but those are obviously very entrenched now. But which is for the most part is good. There's always a fine line. Is it a fob or is it the ICP? Where are we here? So trying to determine which is which was something else I noticed. And the use of technology was a perspective that I saw. We've seen that again since COVID has come, but it's really ramped up into multiple group me texts and other texts and things. There's a lot of different ways to communicate, which is great, with some caveats, of course. But yeah, those are some of the
Okay.
brief moments that I saw.
So you walked right into a question that came in that I'll ask you, and if you've got answers to it, you mentioned a couple technologies. Great. we'll go to Jason after this to get his impression of 2025. Maybe he's got some answers to this as well. But speaking of technology, what have you seen that's made the biggest difference for firefighter safety recently? And do you have any examples on how those tools are affecting decision making? Again, you mentioned a couple, but feel free to mention those or others.
Yeah, I think yeah, I spent a lot of years as a field observer, actually walking the line and looking at infrared overnight, looking for spots and things like that. So I think that evolution of infrared technology and that being used in a I wouldn't say live mapping, but it's getting pretty close to that. Being able to see where some of that movement and progression is helps a lot, I think. Something we talked about earlier that's been on the radar for a long time is now finally starting to you're seeing in the fire community is the team awareness kit, the TAC. Colorado is using that a little bit here. It's been in the military community for a long time, and it's a report just came out earlier about it and some of the cost and benefits of it. But that's basically a geolocation of your resources, basically, and so you can track those resources. Tied into the Starlink and satellite data, which is also something that's just like everywhere. Everybody seems to have a Starlink kit. So yeah, leave it there.
So we'll bump it over to Jason. Jason, are there other technologies you're seeing that are making a difference with safety and decision making and whatnot?
Well, I think the Starlink is certainly one of them, and I think as Aaron talked about too, the text groups and Mike did as well. But it's not all. I mean, in my mind, it's not all good because now we have people using these disparate streams, and we lack a common operating picture, right? And so whether it's there's a lot of, like I said, military versions of this, but it almost like the more we have alternate streams to be able to communicate, the more we need something that aggregates all that data into one place, and so we can maintain a common operating picture. I love the daytime IR. Love the fact that that the risk, right? If you imagine your toes on the line, and then if you fall off that line, you're dead. When it's dark, you're going to keep your toes further from the line. When we get more information, we're able to operate closer to that line, so we can take advantage of little windows of opportunity. But when everybody's got information streams that are going differently and there's not a common operating picture, it always makes me wonder, like, whose toes are on the line and who's just stepped over the line and nobody knows. Yeah,
In your view, is there are there things that are add-ons or being created that are going to help with that common operating picture? Because we all appreciate all the data coming in. Is there promise?
Yeah. So I was at NATO Command and Control meeting in The Hague 2 years ago, and Systematic, who has done tons of stuff for our military and for other militaries, most of the NATO. And I was telling them what all the different information we wanted to aggregate was. I'm like, yeah, we can already do that. We already do that. We already do that. So it exists. And there wasn't one thing that I stumped them on, from weather to different, to iPhones to, they already are used to aggregating all that and then clearing the noise out for you. So you just get the information that you need. We just haven't invested in it, or we haven't made it a priority.
Promise though, Kevin's probably squirming because he is a techie. He's a techie. He's like, no, it's all positive. Let's continue moving forward.
I mean, we gotta be thoughtful and intentional about how we actually implement it, and because everything has a cost, and I think one of the challenges with TAC is that because it is free, maybe there's some members in the fire service that don't think it actually has any value. But of course, it's not free. There's other hardware and integrations you need to do that do cost money. But Jason, to your point of not having a cop, I look at TAC as it's a taxpayer funded initiative. There's thousands of Air Force engineers working on it, and there's a larger civilian growth to adopting it. And you can integrate drone streams, you can integrate all different types of data sets and have a shared pane of glass. Of course, you can continue to use these other common operating pictures, but I'm starting to not see any other reasons to say no for the fire service to at least start with TAC. And there's a TAC SME named AJ Johansson. He's been really big in terms of leading it. So I'm encouraged that we're talking about TAC more in the fire service, because again, I think we're at a point now where we can't say no. It's too much of a strategic advantage for the fire service to not consider some type of cops attack. So curious if anyone else had any thoughts on that, or Jason, why isn't there greater adoption of TAC, or what we continue to do to get fire service to embrace software tools that provide better situational awareness?
Yeah, that's a great question. Me personally, I kind of homogenize things in a way that's not useful. I think about like fire modeling, that they'll say, oh, we got better fire modeling. It's still based on Rothermore. It's still the same old thing. And so when they talk about technology innovations being the key, I'm a little bit skeptical, but I'm not about TAC or about systematic, because they're the only two that I know really well, and I've used them with search and rescue before as well, using TAC. But we are creating a disadvantage for ourselves to have all these different information streams that don't come together, because things are going to get missed, and someone's going to think they communicated something critical, and it's going to end up in a bad day. And if you just think about TAC and even just Yarnell, you put a geofence up, know where people are, know where a hazard alerts you on wind speeds and everything. That changes stuff. And that is not just on those really bad days. So I don't know why we don't do it, but we should. We definitely should integrate.
Agreed.
We're going the wrong way.
So Jason, more generally, what have you seen in 2025? I know you go out as an ops chief, and I know everybody thinks they're tip of the spear, but I think ops chiefs pretty much truly are the tip of the spear.
Wow, yeah.
Right?
I mean, if we're doing it right, we're setting the table so the divisions and everybody are at an advantage, and the field operations doing that. So I guess for everybody else, so the way we run our team is we have 3 operations section chiefs. We have field operations, that is the answers as operations. They are the incident commander for the resources in the field. And with 3 of us talking about common operating picture, there can be confusion, right? The second one is planning ops, and basically they're setting the table for that person and working with plans and everything to develop the IAP, get everything so they go out there, they're good to go. And then my job as strategy is I'm the 24 hours to the end of the incident person who helps to make sure that we have a congruent strategy, because as Aaron talked about the delegation part, I called it the delegation to task operational framework, but we have to have a congruent thread running from delegation all the way to the tasks that are being implemented on the ground, if we're going to be effective and if we're going to have operational actions that support our strategy. And so a lot of my time is spent making sure that we have that continuity across there and that it's achievable. So a strategy isn't a strategy unless it incorporates ends, ways, and means, where what the end is what you accomplish, the ways and means are how you're going to do it, and the resources you're going to do it with. So to roll that into 2025, there's the CIM. If you're a type 2 team and you became a CIM, you needed stuff you didn't have. You needed air operations branch directors. You need other things, because now all of a sudden you may get a quote unquote type 1 incident, and so that introduced scarcity. And that's there's been interesting little things, and that's the biggest example I have of how it introduces scarcity. The other thing that kind of fascinates me is we have this mandated 7 days off now. Right now, that your team can't go back up for 7 days. There's lots of reasons given for why that is. But when you're an AD, they are shopping for the next team that needs them right now. And there's like a whole black ops kind of a network going on there. So it means that we sometimes are waiting for our people to come back, or we're saying, hey, we thought we had a roster. We don't really have a roster. And we actually have maintained a really good roster, even through some of the attrition on our team. And so those things are the interesting part. 2025 wasn't that hard for us. And in some ways that worried me, because we've had some incidents that were of the complexity that we have experienced in the past. And I wonder how long until some of those perishable skills that we had developed and are going to no longer be with us. And then when we need them, we're going to be super clunky. So I spent a lot of time talking to people and focusing on drilling that down. But you can only tell people so many times that, hey, one day we're going to have to be really effective at this. And if they haven't experienced it, it's a little bit hard to have them give every bit of effort into accomplishing that. So those, real quick, that was my
Couple questions came up. So, and just for clarity, CIM, we'll keep saying it because we're in it. All of us are in it. Complex incident management. And over the past 2 or 3 years, the national wildland system, national wildfire system has gone from having type 1 and type 2 incident management teams, with a few exceptions. There's some states that still do the type 1 and type 2, but for the most part, the national system has crunched type 1 and type 2 teams and gone for what we hope will be a more long-term modular approach called complex incident management or complex incident management teams. And the theory is you create the size and complexity of team that you need when you go to stuff. But as you just pointed out, Jason, that's not as easy as it seems. It's easy on paper. It's not as easy as practically. But to clarify a different thing, you had referred to the term AD. Who's an AD and who's not an AD in the system? How does that work?
Oh, yeah. So Mike, I think Mike right now probably is an AD, right? So administratively determined, usually retirees, people like that, that aren't part of a federal, state, or local government's daily employment roster, if you will. And they bring them on, just for instance, some of them, and then they have a sponsor, and then through that sponsor that we get to use them. It's a militia. Well, we're all kind of a militia, but it is another kind of the militia that comes in, and we couldn't do it without them. That's, I mean, especially in logistics, we'd be doomed. We absolutely could not do it without them. So yeah, that's what, I don't know.
Got it. Got it. Sort of non-permanent. And in some places, like I'm from New Mexico, even local government, when we go out, we're considered ADs. It's not, fortunately, it's not as black and white as it might be. But I will point out, Jason, that you just guilted Aaron into staying on as a logistics officer, because you're talking about scarcity of logistics. And then, Mike, sorry, I think he called you a vulture, but you're a free agent. So.
Well, I mean, there's some nuance to that term AD, right? Because I'm in Colorado, and I'm not technically an AD. I'm a supplemental resource through a volunteer fire protection district. So they're my sponsor. I work under their contract cooperative state cooperator agreement through the state, which then gets transferred to the feds, right? So technically, I am under that volunteer agency, and I work through that system. ADs typically around here were typically, and there's not many of them left anymore because all of that administrative work used to fall on someone at the ranger district. Some administrative assistant at the ranger district has to compile all that information, arrange all this stuff for these people, and it was a collateral duty for them. And so a lot of districts have said we're not going to support that anymore. So there's a lot of people out there that are working through volunteer agencies or trying to hook up with volunteer agencies as a sponsor to get out, which will probably lead into some more discussion of how do you get people into the system, and where do they come from? I think there's a lot of opportunity for people to engage in all different levels of the CIMT, depending on their skill sets, but they just need a clear pathway on how to do that. For example, my brother retired from FedEx, and he's done everything in the parking tender kind of world, and like, how do I get him involved? Because for fixed wing parking tender or seat manager, things like that, but he lives in Chicago. Like, how do I connect him to a system to get him out there? He would be amazing at it, but how do I do that? Those are questions that are, how do we get people to augment the system as people attrition out or resources get eliminated and positions get eliminated and things like that. So
You answered that question, Mike? Have you figured out an answer to, and specifically your brother, but in general?
Well, it's there's some limitations, I believe, in how and who you connect with as a volunteer agency. Where I go out now, I mean, I'm more or less within a mile of their district, so it allows me to go through them. But you can't say, like, my brother in Chicago couldn't attach himself to this Colorado agency and go out. It's not really a legitimate way to do it. So, but typically it's people connecting with local fire protection districts or volunteer agencies. If they have an agreement with the state, they can work through that system. In my brother's case, I don't know. I'd have to connect him with a wildlife refuge out there or something that's federally or some agency that has that connection. And typically in the East, Central East, those don't exist very readily. They're not very common as they are in the West. We're almost all of us out here are connected in that way. So I don't really have an answer for him, but for others, yeah, if you're out West, that's typically the route.
Yeah. And for what it's worth, all of us on this call, Kevin accepted, in one way or another, doing work with International Association Fire Chiefs Wildland Fire Policy Committee to try to answer that question. Like, are there other ways we can get more people in the system? Is there a way we can create, some sort of philanthropic or nonprofit or non-governmental broker who takes somebody like your brother? I mean, you think of how many pilots there are out there, or people who've done logistics. It doesn't always have to be operational. It doesn't have to be the person digging a line or working directly for Coil's shop. There's a ton of positions that people are good at. You think you could go to Target or Amazon or something and say, here, just staff our logistics
Yeah,
side
right.
of things, but there's no way to do that right now, right? But we're
No,
working
I
on
mean,
it.
the you could say that the RPL is a way to do that, but that's just a way to do that in name in a lot of states, not
So
necessarily.
what is describe RPL?
So RPL is recognition of prior learning. It's an approved NWCG pathway. There's a whole PMS, a whole, I don't know what PMS stands for, but whole book that tells you exactly what you need to do it, how you submit your portfolio, and how then that information is recognized. I can tell you, at least for Arizona, because I'm working through this right now, that it does not work. If the state all of a sudden says we're not doing it, even though they have agreed to follow the NWCG rules. So I mean that in theory, the RPL way is, somebody comes in there with their resume, if you will, they check all the boxes that they are good at being fulfilling a logistics section chief role because they did it for a large unit in the military, and we just have to teach them our words instead of the words they used. But we can't get them in there that easy. It's super difficult. Yeah, at least that's my
Publication management system, PMS.
there you go, PMS. Thank you.
So Jason, I in no way want to make you uncomfortable. So at any point, if you say, let's not talk about this, I will shut up. But I think you are having, I know because I've been working with you on your RPL application and your recognition of prior learning, in order to qualify for a higher level position. For somebody who might be thinking about doing RPL, are you willing to just give a 1 minute brief on what that looks like and what you've been doing?
Yeah, so it's been crickets from the person that has at the state of Arizona that said that he has to review this, unfortunately, and what should happen in other states, because when we were talking about this in the Wildland Fire Policy Committee, there are certain states that already had process. Montana had a clear process on how you were to follow that, and that would be, I guess, the first thing is that you can look at the PMS on the publication management system, and it will tell you exactly how to do every little step. But before you engage in that effort, I guess you should make sure that whoever is your credentialing authority, and for us to be to open, and this is just open your task book. So if I can get through these hurdles, then I would open my complex incident management IC task book, incident commander task book, and then you still have to demonstrate competence and everything, which is fine. That's how you get you into the how it applies in our world part. But if you're in a state that is not going to recognize a process that is a component of the NWCG framework that they have said they adopted, then I guess just buckle up if you're going to keep going through that, because it's a lot of work. It was like 85 pages to get the whole thing done.
Well, to be fair, you're trying to qualify for like the highest level position. So if Kevin decided, I want to go out as a GIS specialist, or as a in a publication shop printing maps or something, he would go and figure out, that's the position I'm shooting for. He could go into the national system, NWCG's system, and say, here are the things that I'm supposed to do, and then essentially create a resume that shows, although I didn't do them exactly as you described, I think I've got an equivalent, and here's why I think that. And then somebody would review that and then
Yep.
say, yeah, you're qualified. Now here's a task book. Go prove you can do the job. Is that pretty good summary?
Yeah, the GIS position would say what the core competencies were of that position. And I do a lot of job description stuff in my day job, so this is fun. And so you have those core competencies, and then you say, this is how I've demonstrated those core competencies. And then you say, okay, I need 5 people, 3 to 5, I think is what it says, to attest to the fact that you've demonstrated those competencies. So then you get letters from 3 to 5 people, and you include those in your packet. And you say, hey, this is how my formal education, if you have a degree in information system technology, this is how it supports that. And then you put all that together, and then you go through, and then you meet with someone, they either ask you questions, or they just approve it based on the merit of the packet. Then you're issued your task book, and then you get to go work side by side with another qualified GISS and go through the different pieces of your task book, which is awesome. And from Engine Boss up, we could get so many more resources into the system if we better recognize, especially from the IFC, from the red trucks, all of the different capabilities that exist there. But if there's a roadblock at the state level, it makes it clunky.
So to link that back to what, and Kevin, I know you'd actually want to be a loafer now that you've heard that it exists. So just, I should have just,
Sounds like some fun,
right?
hard work. So I don't know. I'm intrigued.
Yeah, maybe we could do both. So to bring that back to 2025, why we even started talking about qualifications is, Jason, you had described a strained system. Although we didn't really run into it head on, we got maybe lucky in 2025. We got a strained system, so we want more people getting in it. Aaron, you've in like 3 or 4 different states now. You've been part of IMTs. Why should somebody from local government even be interested in being part of an IMT? Why shouldn't they just say, no, I'm going to stick around home and be an AA, an agency administrator? Why should somebody be interested?
And you bring up a good point. I was going to talk about that a little bit. So I think some of the succession plan problems we have is staffing levels of, we can support sending people out. They're going to gain leadership skills, management skills, organizational skills, communication skills, the IMT process or NIMS process. They're going to gain a lot regardless of what section you're in or command staff. But it's the backfill of those people. Are people willing to backfill to come in? And I know I'm kind of speaking as an agency administrator or a chief role, is, I've got to protect the home unit. And then what is the fiscal recovery of those people that I get sent out and backfill? What agreements are in place? Coming from the country of California, they worked through all that problem of, the backfill and the portal to portal through contract negotiations. EMAC or that whole system does not provide for really an expense neutral program. So, we provided resources down to Southern California this year. Our people gained a ton of information, but and knowledge and the whole gamut of what I just talked about. And I think educating fire chiefs that they're, regardless if you're logistics, finance, plans, or operations, it's all going to be beneficial to your organization. We had an incident in Oroville, California, where the EOC was put up in Chico for the Oroville Dam spillway, and we were using base camp managers in Chico for the evacuation sites, where they could manage those evacuation sites and then communicate it back to the EOC of what those needs are for the community, whether people's needed their medications filled. And I think there's a lack of understanding of agency administrators of how valuable it is to get your people involved. But like Mike and we've already talked about with the 2 others, is that getting people in the door is the hardest part. When working in logistics, watching IROC kick back UTFs when there's divisions all over the place and they can't get them to go out, and whether it's the home unit saying no or there's roadblocks at the gatekeeper for the states. You had mentioned the IFC WUI policy committee trying to remove those barriers. it is a government quagmire to get people through and out. And I know that doesn't answer your question, how do we motivate people? And I think part of the motivation comes from people at my level who have the decision-making authority to open the door for them to get out and know the process to get them in the door is where we have a gap. And then from there, the next level is the states allowing them to have local government be part of it is another barrier that we have. And then, like we were talking about en masse, and not to go down that rabbit hole, but IROC is a federal-based system that there are human failure points that prevent people getting that opportunity to go out. I think it's a very complex problem that will require some. And the bottom line from my purview, do I have the dollars to send people out, and do I have the people to do it? And those are the barriers, the two simplest barriers that I have to get people out the door.
Dollars and people. Aaron, you just said IROC. I think Mike and perhaps even Jason had said it. It's the National Response Ordering System. Just so people know, most pretty federal centric, although it's how state, local, and even ADs go out as well. And then you had
Yes.
said UTFs, which is unable to fill. So we keep track the whole year of what we're not able to fill. A request that was made by a Jason Coyle because an Aaron Lowe had said, this is what we want as our community. And we keep a list of things that were asked for that can't be filled. UTF, unable to fill. So Aaron, as these seasons are getting longer, and again, we'll all admit that maybe we got off, well, maybe Aaron accepted, we got off a little easy this year, but how are you addressing the human side of operations and running a department? All the mental health stuff, fatigue stuff, recruitment, building, bringing people in to keep doing your job throughout the year, in addition to all the things that fire departments are asked to do outside of IMT and operations work, prevention, public education. How are you doing all that as a fire chief?
Barely. I think having the right people in the right positions is critical. For me, I I I I am very proactive in the plan, prepare, mitigate. I think addressing those first or making those a priority not only reduces the risk to the community, but it also minimizes the exposure to the firefighters. If they, we had one wind-driven fire that went through a community of 64 homes, but they had done some fire prevention work, fuel mitigation work, and most of the homes were saved through those efforts. And we don't have a very robust responding force, and the state and federal responders have a delayed response. That's where I think that we're there. Um, our organization hasn't had a lot of fires, so they're taking advantage of the knowledge they're gaining on these incidents, so we can improve our suppression efforts. And so the mental fatigue is good there. But we've been, in Chico when we were basically running, 90 days on incidents, rotating people through. You have to change your administrative policies. If there was major fires in the Butte County areas over the last 15, 20 years, you change your routine to the cover crews are just there to make sure you're mission ready and respond to calls, and training drops off, community or continuing education drops off because they're literally working 120 hours a week, getting a day off, and then going back into the cycle. Thankfully that it wasn't like that down in my other department talking to them, but they've been hit with the Camp Fire, the Park Fire, the North Fire, and then also providing mutual aid to other organizations, whether it's throughout the state of California or others. So management has to take a look at their personnel, talk to them, engage with them. And for me, the liaison for that is the labor organization, and get a pulse of where people are at, and understanding that there is chronic fatigue that will sneak up on them, and making sure that they're okay. And sometimes we have to say no for sending resources out.
Sure. So Jason, as an assistant chief locally and literally an operations chief on IMTs, what about that human element for you? What are you guys doing to make sure people are being addressed?
Uh, on the team, one of the things that we've actually worked hard to do lately is let people know when it's okay, that it's okay sometimes not to show up, especially as a type 1 team that is going, as you know, become a complex incident management team. If we have something of lesser complexity, and even if we don't, and you have a kid's birthday party and you're wondering if you should miss it, people are so committed to the team, they'll show up even if we don't really need them. And you have to have those conversations ahead of time so people know that you want them to go to the birthday party. And some of the way that works is that you will say, hey, I'll accept your order and then show up when you can. We lost our dog this year, and my team was so cool about the fact that I was able to stay home with my wife while we were trying to nurse him back to health, and that didn't work, and then do some stuff remotely before joining. And I think that's the part is don't just set arbitrary standards that don't recognize that the rest of the world is going on around them. And that'd be the outside on the team thing. On the inside, a lot of what Aaron said, we monitor the mandatories. We've changed some rules to allow higher ranking people to backfill for lower ranking after it's gone through the people in those ranks. And then sometimes you have to say no if and they future out the staffing, and if it looks like it's going to end up with mandatory people made force hire, I think is what some folks call it, then we don't accept an assignment and don't send as many resources out, and let everybody know the reason why.
Isn't that amazing? The answer to how to make sure your human resources are taken care of is to actually treat them like humans. Odd.
I should have said that.
Odd. All right. So we're going to end this by looking forward a little bit. And Mike, I'll go to you first. Since you've been silent for a bit, what's in maybe a minute or so, what's the future in wildland fire and incident management?
Well, I think I think Aaron touched on it there is the preloading of the plan, prepare, mitigate kind of work. A lot of the workshops that I do around the world or whatever, I always say that response is sort of the last resort. If you can kind of reframe what a response is, that, you've tried everything else, you've tried all this mitigative efforts, and it hasn't worked. We have to respond to this X level, XY ramp, right? I was on a plane a little while ago, and a guy sitting next to me asked me about, what does it look like this year, and all the questions we've kind of gone over. And he says, well, if you just had more resources, would that do the trick? And I'm like, well, it's kind of like if you have a cardiac problem, you have bad cardiac, and cardiac is an issue in your community, the answer isn't to have more ambulances. The answer is to catch it on the early end. More ambulances is going to stop the amount of heart attacks you have. More fire trucks isn't necessarily going to make the fires smaller or stop them. It's all these other efforts. So I think the future of wildland fire is really is doing more community risk reduction, recognizing what that looks like. In the West, we say WUI, and everybody has an idea what that looks like. As we move farther east, you might find people saying, well, we don't have a wildfire problem. We have grass fires, but we don't have wildfires. Well, okay, at that point, they're kind of the same. There's still an impact to your community. There's still a lot of mitigation and community risk reduction that can happen. On the global scale, you'll hear it called integrated fire management, which has more of a community level engagement on what that looks like. You travel around the world, and communities and landowners have more responsibility for and liability for fires that are on their land that cross over. So I think it's preloading.
Preloading. Aaron, what do you think? What's the future wildland fire and IMTs?
I think the future of the IMTs, we'll start with that, is really going to be we're at a crossroads. Most of the incident management teams that I've been exposed to have more senior members, and bringing people through the system is going to be challenging. I think that's already been vetted through data. But I think I think that what really needs to be pushed is that local government needs to find their individual states pathways to get people engaged and make a commitment through your organizations, whether it's a labor group or your volunteers, of how to get people engaged and why it's going to benefit the organization and the community. And that again goes back for me as a fire chief is fiscally, how do I pay for it and get that reimbursement cost back? And then for the wildland, for me, it's an eye opener here in Washington. Mike's been here. I don't know if Jason's been here, but there is a lot of old growth timber that has not burned in years, and we have an opportunity in Washington to mitigate that from lessons learned in Oregon, Colorado, Washington, and other states with similar fuel types. That this is a statewide problem. They call it the west side here, but that's pretty much on the west side of the Cascade where they have a lot of moisture and they don't have those conflagrations we do. So getting them to understand that, when we're paying close to $2 million in aircraft for 2 days worth of suppression, that comes out of the state budget, and it does affect the state, and it's everybody's issue. But by taking on IBHS building standards and fuel mitigation standards and making a commitment to improve your fuel mitigation through a program that would be sustainable, not just for 1 year, needs to be addressed with the policymakers and supporting the fire service and what they're trying to tell you. I have an opportunity here in Washington to do that, whereas in California, everything was reactive. CAL FIRE is one of the best organizations that I've ever seen run, but they've had to have a lot of catastrophic events for the dollars to be opened up to support that. Fire service in California, whether you're local government or state or federal, you all have to know wildland fire actions because you're going to be exposed to it, whether you're in your own community or you're supporting another community. So, as this group knows, tackling this is going to be a big effort, and we have different lanes that we can try to mitigate it and suppress it. But as Mike said, Jason's the last line of defense for communities with operations, and us as policymakers and administrators, we need to do something better to advise community homeowners. And how one of the things we've been talking about is how we can convince the insurance companies that this is something that is going to be beneficial to them. One of the things we're doing here is we're engaging with realtors, insurance agencies, and the construction industry. If people can't get insured, all those businesses or those disciplines are going to suffer. And what are we going to do as an organization or as a community to bring in those non-traditional partners to mitigate those threats?
Mitigation prevention. Jason, put icing on this cake, man. Quick, what's the future?
Yeah, you're right. And I will say, Aaron, I have been where you're placed. Matter of fact, I have even been sued for the putting in a protection line around the city of Plain or the community of Plain. So I'm very familiar with your part of the woods. IMTs. So IMTs are going to continue to have the standards reduced to match the resources available until such time that there's a failure that has such significant consequence that we have to redo the system. That is truly what I think is going to happen. And when it comes to wildfire, I would say that if we can adapt to adopt a more, like I sent you guys the brochure to the wildfire policy committee, but a whole of society approach to this, where it's more like multi-domain operations, where everybody understands how we can apply these tools at wildfire. We get better at messaging that. I think then local government can support it better. It makes it easier for talking points for fire chiefs, because they're like, all right, this is one domain. There's multiple different domains that we have to operate in. The skill set that we develop here is going to help us in those different domains. And we have to accept that there is responsibility for the fire problem that exists on every level of government. And you're not going to solve it just at one. If you have building codes that allow people to build in places where they can't be defended, more homes are going to burn and more finger pointing is going to occur and more insurance companies are going to pull out. That's all. It'll be fine.
That's it. It's all good. It's all positive. Jason, Mike, Aaron, you guys are awesome. We appreciate you being here. Thanks also to IAFC for hosting this, for allowing us to do this. Kevin, close us out.
Yeah, I think like with all these episodes, the hour flies by, and more so that we need to have follow-up conversations probably in Q1 of how to continue to prepare for what's ahead in 2026. But it does seem like there are some areas of optimism, so that was encouraging, but obviously no shortage of issues we need to continue to address. But yeah, Mike, Aaron, Jason, pleasure. Excited to continue to learn more and collaborate. I'm definitely keen to dive into further on all of the wildfire initiatives we talked about, as well as with an angle of tech and maybe even tack. So be reaching out to you guys and stay tuned for the next Wildfire Wednesday in 2 weeks from today. We'll be posting that event on LinkedIn, the event, and hope you all have a great rest of your Wednesday. And until next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.